Hello there, my name is Carpo, or Joshua, and I am a stranger on the internet that is making a bold claim, so therefore I should have a disclaimer first. I've tried to start this twice, but I actually got distracted. Go figure. ADHD, right? I wanted to make the bold claim, that ADHD does not exist, that it is a complete fabricated illness, a fabricated condition that is created by the pharmaceutical industry in order to pump your kids full of drugs. That may sound conspiratorial, that may sound ridiculous to a lot of people, but sometimes you have people who are on your side, people who are eminent psychologists and psychiatrists who, if you do trust the field of medicine, you must choose and trust the people who are actually prescribing this medicine, correct? Therefore, if they're making a claim that something's not as it claims, or not as it's stated, then it's important to pay attention. And I thought, instead of me rambling about it, I should just read this to you, because it would give you a better perspective. This was from a health website, and it was about a guy named Jerome Kagan, who is a Harvard professor, and instead of me explaining, I'll just read what it says. Jerome Kagan is not only a tenured professor at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, he is also considered one of the world's best psychologists. In fact, his fellow academics ranked Kagan the 22nd most eminent psychologist of the 20th century. This ranking puts the good professor ahead of Carl Jung, yes, that Carl Jung, who was ranked at 23rd. So if anyone has earned the right to critique one of the most diagnosed mental health conditions in existence, it's Jerome Kagan, and critique the condition he does. See, Kagan doesn't believe that ADHD is a real condition. That's right, Kagan's position is that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a complete hoax. Needless to say, Kagan's proclamation has ruffled a lot of feathers. Psychologists and other medical professionals have also gone on the offensive, attempting to discredit his statements. He says, ADHD is an invention. Every child who's not doing well in school is sent to see a pediatrician. And the pediatrician says, it's ADHD. Here's Ritalin. And I know for a fact, because I have a friend who had this exact thing happen to him. In fact, he says, 90% of these 5.4 million ADHD diagnosed kids, that's 5.4 million in our country, don't have abnormal dopamine metabolism. The problem is, if a drug is available to doctors, they'll make a corresponding diagnosis. And that's what he said. It said, and then it goes on to say, but when you're considering a more impactful psychologist than Carl Jung, discrediting you is a very difficult thing to do. So what's behind the story? Kagan is scathing in his criticism of the pharmaceutical industry. In his view, the excessive amount of money circulating from the sale of prescription drugs is creating a number of problems. First, physicians can financially benefit from promoting and prescribing certain medications. Of course, this can incentivize medical professionals to overdiagnose a condition in order to earn supplementary income. Some doctors earn in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars just for working with the pharmaceutical industry. In Kagan's view, and in the view of most, this is both an immoral and corruptive practice. Second, pharmaceutical companies have amassed a sizable influence on the political process. Quote, Big Pharma spends billions of dollars each year lobbying politicians to get what they want. In Kagan's view, this is contributing to the corruptive influences within DC and elsewhere. Finally, Kagan says that the more money that flows to psychologists, psychiatrists, and others who conduct research on conditions such as ADHD, a result of overdiagnosis and overprescription. So, they are certainly not exempt from his criticism. According to Kagan, if you do interviews with children and adolescents aged 12 to 19, then 40% can be categorized as anxious or depressed. But if you take a close look and ask how many of them are seriously impaired by this, the number shrinks to 8%. So it goes from a temporary stress or anxiety at 40% down to a full 8% of people who might actually have an issue that needs to be resolved with medication. Or perhaps you could actually use discussions and having conversations with people and, having counseling for a lot of people can make a big difference. It says misdiagnosis leads to overdiagnosis, which is, in Keegan's view, a problem plaguing the mental health profession. Looking at the number of children diagnosed with ADHD, it's difficult to disagree. According to the Centers for Disease Control, approximately 11% of children 4 to 17 age years, 6.4 million people, have been diagnosed with ADHD as of 2011. He also makes the point that most children diagnosed with ADHD fall under one umbrella. Who's being diagnosed with ADHD? Children who aren't doing well in school? It never happens to be children who are doing well in school. And I think that lends a perspective to it that we really need to understand. So here's the answer, as it says, their statement. In Kagan's estimation, the number of big problems exist across the entire field of psychology. While he is sharply critical of ADHD overdiagnosis, and for good reason, the problems Kagan speaks of spans the entire mental health field, such there are no simple answers. But he is adamant that the mental health professionals must shift their approach to diagnosing ADHD, depression, anxiety, and other disorders. The answer? Psychiatrists and other mental health professionals need to begin making diagnosis similar to how most other doctors do, by looking at the causes, not just the symptoms. Again, especially with children who often don't have a great ability or desire to fully explain themselves. He's under no illusion that doing so will be easy. In fact, when confronted with the recent criticism that he is implying mental illnesses are an invention of Big Pharma and others, Kagan goes on the offensive, and he says this: there are mentally ill people who need help. A person who buys 2 cars in a single day and the next day is unable to get out of bed has a bipolar disorder. There are people who, either for prenatal or inherited reasons, have serious vulnerabilities in their central nervous system that predispose them to schizophrenia, bipolar disease, social anxiety, or OCD. We should distinguish these people. In other words, those responsible for administering brain-altering drugs to children need to search a little deeper. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable proposition. So, there's not a lot I can add to that. This is an accredited doctor who is considered by his own peers to be more of an eminent psychologist than Carl Jung himself, saying that ADHD does not exist. And I know a lot of people out there would say, well, he's just one guy. He's not the only one. But more than that, they would say, but I've suffered from this. And I would say, so have I. It's okay. I have no focus. I have the hardest time going, I can jump from one thing to another. I've always been over the top. It's hard for me to focus and get settled, if you will. And I just want to make it clear. This is important to me because I have friends who have been diagnosed with ADHD who took medication. I have other friends who probably really did have ADHD who never took medication. And I have myself who I always considered myself pretty balanced, but I've also looked at my ADHD, if you will, if you want to call it that, as a benefit, not a risk. In other words, giving kids methamphetamines is not the answer to them being hyperactive. And this is, for those who aren't aware, this is exactly what's happening. If you go to the pediatrician and they say give your kid Ritalin and you're willing to give them a pill, you should know what's in that. It's amphetamines. Your kid is taking amphetamines, one of the worst drugs known to mankind. And I would just like to urge parents to be aware, be cautious, be respectful, be responsible for your own kids, and don't trust that a doctor knows what is best and in their best interest. It's not always that the doctor is owned by Big Pharma, nor is it always that they're getting paid for prescribing something. Often it's just plain ignorance. If you have a doctor who's working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, they don't have a lot of time for extracurricular research and activities to learn more about what's happening. As technologies advance, as science and medical advances, there are so many new discoveries about the human mind, about how we interact, and we're starting to find that many of these so-called disorders are just part of being human. And it's my belief that we all have ADHD, that we all have ADD, we all have a little bit of bipolar. And that's not to minimize those who have severe cases. I want to make that very clear. I know people who have severe cases of this, but we each have a little bit to add to the big pie, and all of us have some of these conditions, and hopefully in the right times in our lives. because they can benefit us depending on if we need to work hard, depending on if we need to relax for a while. We need to change our minds to fit our circumstances, and kids are put into a school and a system that is horrible for them. It's horrible for their learning, it's horrible for who they are. They aren't able to really structure themselves in a way that allows them to learn properly. That's my thought. And so even though I've been talking about school and kids lately, I agree with most people's sentiments that the school system is totally screwed. It was designed to make brick and mortar workers get in the factory, punch the clock, listen for the bell. But it doesn't have to be that. Our kids have to learn somewhere. And therefore they're going to school. Each kid has his own unique personality. And then we have a teacher coming in saying, by the way, your kid is just a little bit too talkative and annoying. You better pump him full of pharmaceuticals or else we're going to kick him out of the school. We're a fucked up society right now. We're a really fucked up society. And people are willing to stand up for these, short patches, if you will. They're not long-term solutions. They're just short-term fixes. That's my opinion. And fortunately, some of the psychologists and psychiatrists understand this, but even psychiatry isn't always well respected either. So I guess that's all I've got to talk about on this topic. It's something that's bothered me for a long time, not something that just came to mind. I have talked to a lot of people about this. People who, when they forget something or they interrupt during a conversation or a discussion, oh, sorry, I've got ADHD. This is a programming. Instead of believing it's something we need to work on, like paying attention, we just believe it's a condition. And like I said, for some people, it probably is. But for most people who are diagnosed, it's not. And that goes back to the research in that paper that says 40% of kids were anxious and depressed, but only 8% of them was that a long-term issue. Every kid's going to be fucking anxious and depressed. That's just the world we live in. Grow up, toughen up, make it through. That's all we can do. We're humans for a short time and then we die. I know that sounds brutal, but, there's not always an easy answer. Peace and love. Talk to you next time. I'm out.